Okay, we've started recording. I hope that's all right with everyone.
Just give it 1 more minute and we will make a start. Right, let us crack on with this afternoon's session. I'm just going to flip things very slightly. I'll just cover a couple of things a little bit later on, but just to manage time and people's availability. We're going to start off with the main item for this month, which is on student access and success, our newly I guess reformed is probably the best way to say it, team focused on access and success. And I think it's going to be headed up by Cherie, or up today's presentation at least headed up by Cherie Palmer, who's head of access and success. I don't know, Cherie, whether other members of your team are contributing or directly or not, but you're better to lead us off from there. So I'll hand over to you without further ado, and we'll see where we get to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. So I just had my mic off because there's some work going on just outside my room. So just give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all see
We can see it. Yeah, we can see that.
Great. Okay, so I'll just hide you, Simon, so everyone isn't looking at you for the whole session. Okay, right. So I'm the head of access and success. So pleased to be here to speak to you about the work that my team does, and also to answer any questions that you might have. So Emma, unfortunately, is in a training session today, so she couldn't join us. But I am joined today by Alex, who is one of our student access, success and development managers. So Alex is here to answer any questions you might have about his side of the team. So I think most of you will have already heard perhaps some of this from a previous open meeting, but I thought it was important for us just to kind of go through the basics about the access and success team and what we do. And the reason for that is, as Simon said, our team has been reconfigured. So our access and success team used to be in a different division, and we have been moved into a new division, and we work very closely with employability and development. And the reason for that change, as far as I understand it, is the regulator has a new focus upon the whole student life cycle. So they're very interested in students getting into university, getting on when they're at university, and then progressing to good graduate outcomes. And by that we mean moving on to postgrad study or professional graduate level employment. And actually, one of the things that the director of AFS was really impressed with when he came to visit us last year was the fact that we do sit very closely with employability and development, because it shows we're really focusing on the whole student life cycle. Okay, so why isn't that working? There we go. So what do we do? Okay, so the work of my team is to support what we call underrepresented student groups into and through university. So previously we only had when I say only, previously we had a remit for access. This is before I joined. So my team was very well known and sector leading for their work on outreach, working with what we call widening participation students. And by widening participation, we mean students who wouldn't normally have the opportunity to access higher education for a variety of reasons. But now we have an additional remit, which I think is really exciting, and which is my specialism, which is student success, which is ensuring student success and attainment on course, from transition right the way through to graduation and beyond. Okay, so those underrepresented groups, you're probably wondering who they are. So that would include groups such as care leavers, service families, some Black, Asian, minority, ethnic students, students with disabilities. So those are some examples of groups that we support. So what is our sort of day-to-day job? What are we focusing on? So we have these core functional assignments. So the first is managing pre-16 access. So that means we work very closely with schools. We have a partnership with Greater Manchester Higher at University Connect, which is a government-funded project at the moment, but they are actually reducing the funding. So we work in partnership with other institutions across the region to provide independent information, advice and guidance to students to encourage their progression into HE if that's something they have the potential to do and also would like to do. So we work with secondary schools at the moment. We have worked with primary schools in the past in order to increase access to institutions, higher education institutions. And that doesn't mean just creating a pipeline here. That means helping students to access higher education wherever they should wish to go. And that activity is actually tracked and has to be reported on through a higher education access tracker. Okay. So the second thing we do, targeted proactive success activities. That means looking at students on course, understanding what the barriers and challenges might be to student success, and then putting in place targeted interventions to support attainment and success. And success can mean, more than one thing. Oh, I've gone very far forward. So success can mean success in terms of attainment. Success can also mean development of skills. It can mean building a CV so that we can actually, so students can actually move into their desired professions or careers as well. And the third thing is educational development. And what that means, as an example, is working with a team such as Janine's team, which focuses on quality assurance. So looking at the quality assurance cycle and making sure that we're actually linked into that, or working with the Institute of Teaching and Learning. So as an example, I'm planning a month-long programme of development activities for the faculties to help them deliver on student success in particular, but also access within at faculty and school level. So I'm working with ITL to develop a programme, or to actually advertise and timetable a programme of these development activities. The next thing, arguably the most important, is the OFS regulatory requirements. That's really a key part of my role. So as you'll probably be aware, the Office for Students is the regulator. They have very strong powers, and they require us to monitor and put support in place to support access, so getting into university, success, succeeding on course, and then progression, as I mentioned, to postgrad study or graduate level employment. So alongside that, we have a monitoring strategy for our APP. So the APP is the document that sets out how we as an institution are addressing gaps for specific groups of underrepresented students. And in order to do that, we are required to actually monitor our progress and to evaluate our strategy. And we are very, very lucky to have here something we don't have, that not all providers have, and that is a monitoring and evaluation team. So we are developing a strategy, and we are providing a kind of consultancy model for the wider institution. So my team have created some amazing web pages which you can click on, and it walks you through the process of building a theory of change or a logic chain for your interventions or strategy to address gaps for students. And it includes a business, case best practice repository for case studies, guides, and so on. So that's something I know is really welcomed across the institution, and we're going to update that constantly, because showing impact absolutely underpins our work, and that's a requirement by OFS. So they've actually stated that in our APP, where we set out how we're going to address gaps for students, we're required to actually state at which points in the cycle, academic cycle, we intend to evaluate, and that not evaluating at those points is a reportable offence. So pretty serious. So it's really great that I've got a strong team working on monitoring evaluation. We also have an assignment for business partnerships. So we're looking for opportunities both externally and internally to actually drive forward our agenda around access, success and progression. And what that might look like as an example is we'll be working with faculties, we'll be supporting their work on access and success. So my team, again, the consultancy model, will be there to provide best practice advice and guidance, to be an extra pair of hands at times as well. So we're constantly looking for opportunities to support the wider institution, whether that's, as an example, working with FBMH to support their student success hub they're setting up, or other activities. Okay, so what do we mean by access? So Emma's not here, so I'm going to cover this bit for her. So access is getting students in. So whenever anybody asks me what I do, I say I'm head of access and success, and my job is getting students in and getting students on. So access is the first step. So quite recently, the government had initiatives where they said to the sector, we want you to increase access for underrepresented groups into higher education. Because looking at the data, it was very clear that certain groups of students were far less likely to access higher education. And the sector responded positively, partly perhaps because that then meant they got additional student fees. But the impact data then showed that those underrepresented groups were not actually making progress in the same way as their more advantaged peers. And that's one of the reasons why we now have success measures to monitor how these students do. Okay, so let's look at some of our third sector partnerships. So I mentioned earlier, we have a partnership with Greater Manchester Higher, a University Connect. We work with a range of universities, we work with colleges and schools, putting on information so that students understand what they need to apply to university, how they apply to university, what going to university looks like. And some of the activity that we put on, I hope you can't hear the scratching and banging outside from the workmen. Some of the activity they might put on would include things like summer schools, bringing students into faculty, familiarisation with the campus and higher education itself to break down barriers and show students from all groups and demographics they too belong and can succeed here. We work with the Brilliant Club. So as an example, we have a programme called Joining the Dots, which is piloting this year. It's a transition programme looking at year 13 students progressing into HE and supporting their transition in their first year at university. We also have an attainment raising programme with them as well, which they actually monitor in terms of impact. Some of you will have heard of Into University, which is set up basically again to support the success of students from underrepresented groups that can provide a space for learning, tuition, revision sessions, advice, guidance, and the university gives huge amounts. So I think it was about £800,000 just to one of those Into University institutions this year. So we currently have Into University Salford, we have Into University Manchester as well. And DDAR do an amazing work as well of bringing in funding from our alum to support these kind of initiatives, to support underrepresented groups. We work with Tutor Trust, providing tuition by our existing students who are trained to go.
Fair enough.
Sorry. Sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought someone asked me to stop. I'll carry on if that's okay.
No, carry on, carry on.
Okay, sorry. So yes, providing tuition to students, and then let me just hide this, sorry. And then we have Reach Out, which is much more, I believe, a careers focused partnership. So working on employability for students. Next thing. So in terms of access, we also have some schemes such as Gateways, which is our own internal pre-16 widening access initiative, which goes into schools and works with students between year 7 and 11, so from the ages of 11 to 16, to encourage their progression into higher education. We provide a range of support for students, targeted supports that includes care experience students, refugees and asylum seekers. We've got campus tours, so we're going in and kind of demystifying university, giving students taster sessions on university. We've got the Manchester Distance Access Scheme. So it's an online programme for students across the country. If students complete the programme satisfactorily, they can actually get a differential offer, so they can get less than the entry tariff. Really important when you consider that the University of Manchester, as a Russell Group university, has very high entry tariffs. So For example, computer science, their minimum entry tariff is 3 A stars, that's the minimum. So for students from underrepresented groups taking part in our interventions such as MDAS, Managed Distance Access, or taking part in MAP, Managed Access Programme, successful completion of that programme can give them a differential offer, which can make the difference between accessing Manchester or not at all. We also way ahead of our time in terms of supporting school governor initiatives. So we've had hundreds of alum and staff placed in schools working at a governance level to raise standards across Greater Manchester as well. Okay, so over to Alex, if that's okay. Alex, did you want to come in now and just say a bit about your side of the team? So Emma's side focuses very much on access, so getting students in. And Alex, did you want to come in now and speak to success?
Yeah, thanks very much, Cherie.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll just run through this slide. So yeah, the Manchester Access Programme, I'm sure many people on this call are familiar with that, but maybe some new members of staff aren't. But that's our flagship post-16 widening access scheme for local students who are underrepresented in higher education. MAP this year, in terms of the kind of changes that we're making to it, not totally reinventing the programme, but just drawing on the learnings, I think, from the last few years and trying to return some more on-campus delivery. We kicked off Easter, and 650 pupils from year 12 started on the programme, and about 600 of them came to campus, and it was a really brilliant atmosphere to try and start fostering that sense of belonging with the institution. And build community, a welcoming community around the university. So with MAP students, and that's a theme that we want to keep taking through, because supporting the students with their application progress and progression to the University of Manchester is a key focus for the programme. We're starting to build in as well elements of new student success as well. So taking on board this new remit for the team. So that's starting to bring in things like employability advice and a new module that's called Make Yourself a Success, where we look at student life, but for MAP students, but looking at what that means for beyond university as well. So thinking beyond their graduation for the first time. Cherie's touched upon monitoring and evaluation before. Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, the evaluation framework is up and running now, and our team continues to look for ways to maybe produce evidence of more long-term impact as well as embedding narrative impact evidence generation across the team. And we're looking to the future as well to be able to use that framework, collaborate across the university to use that framework outside of just access and success activity. Just to note here, the team's responsible for producing our annual impact report, and that is published. So I'll pop the link in the chat afterwards for people who might have missed the news story on that towards the back end of March and into April. And yeah, just to speak now about student success. And as I mentioned before, it's like the newest remit of the team with an area of growth as well. And our primary focus in this delivery-wise has been focused on working with Black heritage students, because as an institution, we have an unexplained awarding gap, which is currently at 12.5% for UK full-time students between Black heritage students and white students. So to seek to address that, we have initiatives like Manchester 1010, which is based on building a community and providing opportunities to engage with university services, excuse me, in partnership with the student group, the Black Excellence Network. And as Cherie mentioned as well, we've recently been running focus groups to hear more about the lived experience of students, so we can better plan and co-create our initiatives to be more effective alongside students, rather than trying to kind of do activity to them. We're trying to work with them as much as possible to make that more impactful. I'm just going to talk here a bit more about scholarships. We've since we last presented in December.
Do you want me to just do this? Because I've got a little bit more to say about some additional scholarships that Simon's asked me about.
No
So
problem.
shall I take over from this bit? Thank
Okay.
you very much. Simon, are you happy for me to give the news about Carrie here as well?
Yes, by all means, by all means.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so part of my remit is part of my remit is to understand what the barriers are for students, and qualitative evidence suggests that one of the main barriers for underrepresented student groups is actually finances. So one of the things we look to do is to understand which students are most impacted by that and what we can do to actually mitigate that challenge. I'm just going to stop sharing for the moment because I find it really weird staring at a screen. So can you all see me again? If I stop sharing? Yeah, okay. So DSE are absolutely brilliant in terms of supporting our vision for student success. So I worked with DSE and we were able to secure some funding for scholarships for Black heritage students from Raheem Sterling via his Raheem Sterling Foundation. So that's something really exciting, which you'll probably have heard about this week. So that's going to be 7 scholarships for Black heritage students. In addition to that, at the end of this week, that's only tomorrow, isn't it? You'll also hear about some additional scholarships for Black students, which we've managed to get agreement for, and that's via the Carrie Scholarship Foundation. So in total, we have approximately 21 scholarships with the Carrie Scholarship Foundation for Black heritage students. So some of those scholarships are match funded, and some of them FSE has kindly funded in total itself. So basically that means that students can come to this institution and not worry about their tuition fees or their maintenance. So that's really exciting. So the next thing on our list as well is I'm really interested to see if we can put support in place, enhanced support for care experienced students, care leavers or estranged students. So I'm working at the moment to try and find funding, about 2.5 million, something like that, for funding for students who have left care, to make sure that those students have an opportunity to access higher education, that while they're here, they're not worrying about paying their bills, getting into debt, having nowhere to live. So we're looking at things like, can we get them a laptop? Can we make sure that they have guaranteed accommodation across the 52 weeks of the year? And looking at ways to ensure that debt is not a burden to those students. So those are some of the key things that we do. One of the reasons why we focus on Black heritage students is because the Office for Students, so they had a new director in February, and he came out with a bang, and he said, basically, I'm tired of institutions putting on lots of activity and not being able to show impact. So what he's really keen to see is that we have a theory of change model for our interventions, we have a clear strategy, we have numerical outcomes, we're tracking our progress, and we can actually report upon impact. And he's been very clear that institutions that cannot show that they are addressing gaps between specific groups of students may find themselves subject to the full regulatory force of OFS. And that would include, as an example, capping tuition fees or capping student numbers. So you can imagine it's really important that we get our strategy right, so we're addressing gaps for students. And they wrote us a monitoring outcomes letter, which is when you specify what the risks are for your institution. And the one group they identified at the University of Manchester was Black heritage students. So although our gap in attainment for Black students is actually lower than the sector, we haven't met our targets that were set in our previous APP. So that's one thing that we know OFS is going to be watching very, very carefully. So we've put in place plans to run a coaching pilot with FBMH starting from next September. And that coaching pilot is going to be based upon a coaching programme that I created when I was at the University of Kent. And that programme was super successful. So students were put onto that programme because they were underachieving. So they were attaining a 2-2 or a 3rd. And 93% of the Black students on that programme graduated with a 1st or a 2-1 in the University of Kent Law School. So if you imagine there was a gap in attainment of 38% between Black and white students in the law school, and I led the strategy, that was a little bit challenging because they didn't necessarily understand what it was I wanted to do, but I pointed out to them, well, you've just trebled the award gap for these students. So anyway, the year that I led the strategy, we completely closed that award gap. And in fact, that year, our Black heritage students and our Black, Asian, minority ethnic students actually outperformed white students. And that's absolutely unheard of nationally. So I'm bringing the coaching programme, the model that I set up there, to Manchester, but also, of course, tweaking it based on our particular context to make sure it addresses the needs of students here. So that's something we're really exciting about. And Alex mentioned briefly student partnership. So I really strongly believe in working with students and hearing from students what it is that they need. So we've set up what we're calling the Black Heritage Students Consultation Group. We're working in partnership with them. So we're taking them our ideas, we're brainstorming, we're talking about challenges and barriers and how to overcome them. And we, as an example of our partnership working, we yesterday ran a focus group for FSE. We had about 20 Black heritage students. Peter Green, the Vice Dean for Teaching, Learning and Students, it was, he was there chairing as well. And we were able to ask Black heritage students, what are the barriers that you face? What do we do well? And we got lots of great things about what we do well. And then what are the barriers and how can we mitigate them? So we're very closely working with students to address that. I also work closely with the Students' Union. So I had a Student Union person there. I meet faculty officers from the Students' Union. I've invited the Students' Union onto the bursary and scholarships management groups they can feed in. And also I've shared with them initial suggestions for how we approach our new access plan. So we're very much working in collaboration with students, informed by the students' perspective. So that's just a short summary of what it is that we do. Happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much indeed, Cherie and Alex. Alex, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we go to sort of wider questions and so on?
No, all covered. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. So questions, I mean, thank you. That was really, I mean, could spend hours going through many of those details in many of those aspects in more depth. Interestingly, by a genuine coincidence, while you were speaking, I've had an email on behalf of a new secondary school that's opening in September, I think it is, in Wythenshawe, interested in making some connections with us, both in terms of coming and getting some insight into university life, but also obviously teaming up with us from an access point of view. So it's quite timely. So I'll connect Emma up with them in due course. So just open it out at this point on what you've heard so far.
I just shocked everyone into submission. Too much information to take in.
Oh, you always need someone needs to break the ice. We always have this problem. Once someone's broken the ice, you're fine.
Who's going to be brave?
There you go, Thomas. You're a hero. Fire away, sir.
Hi, I'm in DAS, Disability Advisory and Sports. I was just really interested to hear, because you did mention disabled students as a group that you work with. Really interested to hear in what particular things, particularly in the I guess progression will be the bit we're directly involved in, but maybe what else is going on in access and success that we're not involved in, really.
Well, funny enough, I've actually got a meeting booked in with Louise. I think is it next week or in the next couple of weeks, to look at how we can collaborate with DAS. So we've just got data from the OFS, which sets out where our gaps are. We know that we have got small gaps for disabled students. They're very, very small, but they exist nonetheless. What we're going to look at is how we can support that. I'm also aware that Kellyanne's team have got some disability mentoring in place as well, which is intended, I believe, to help with progression. So those are kind of things we're going to look at, but also there can be a piece around actually raising awareness of the importance of claiming disability support allowance, because nationally in the sector we find that students who are in receipt of disability support allowance are less likely to have an awarding gap or a progression gap than other students. But for us, I think the issue is around progression rather than attainment so much. So I think there's a piece of work to be done around, employers' expectations, whether employers understand what it is they might need to put in place to support disabled students. But I will be taking advice from the specialists in this area, which would be Louise and other staff from the disability support services. And also we like to you know, kind of canvas students as well. So in the same way we did a survey of care experience students to understand what the sticking points are for care experience students, and that's now informing the proposal that we're writing to get this additional funding for care experience students. We'll do the same thing. We'll take qualitative feedback from disabled students to understand what is it disabled students. So rather than saying this is what we want to give you, it's what do you say the issues are, and then how can we mitigate that? So any ideas you have, I would love to hear if you have some.
Well, can connect
Thank you.
up offline. Thank you, Thomas, for the question.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments, connections? Caroline, please.
This was more of a so the connection and a comment as well, really, around areas of work that overlap. So I don't know how much there is an awareness of the Turing scheme that was launched by the UK government during the course of the pandemic. In fact, it was launched as a replacement for the European Erasmus programme. But a major focus of the Turing scheme is to level up, address the success gap within universities, and so a significant proportion of the funding that we hopefully secure each year is very much targeted at supporting underrepresented groups and widening participation. So it's really just sort of mentioning that that's something that's going on. We've secured around £2 million in each of our last 2 bids. We've just submitted our latest bid and hope that we will have a similar amount of funding for next year, majority of which we will target to those underrepresented groups. So it's really a sort of an awareness thing about that connection there and how we can build that in as part of those success strategies, with placements and international programs very much being something where the evidence to date suggests it makes a dramatic difference for those students in terms of their outcomes.
Yeah,
Yes.
happy to connect up with you, Caroline. Particularly for MAP students, that sounds like something that could figure into the Make Yourself a Success kind of module, looking at that employability and how that would actually help them improve their degree outcome as well, because I think placements show and exchanges show an improvement in degree outcome.
And also, Alex, we want to capture that in the APP as well. We put that in. So yeah, I leave you two to grab a coffee and make that connection as well. Thank you, Caroline.
I was just
Any
going to
more?
say, I'm a great believer in placements, but from a strictly APP perspective, unfortunately, it wouldn't be something that would be a core focus. So the APP lists 12 risks, sector-wide risks. So, for example, the first one is knowledge and skills. So be looking at, do students get the attainment they need pre-16 to be able to access Key Stage 5 courses, to access higher education? So looking at those 12 risks, we would struggle to have a huge focus. I know I've had several conversations with and quite long conversations with the International Office about the APP and funding and so on. So while we would definitely support students doing placements, in terms of our APP, I think research also shows that students who tend to engage with the industry tend to be students who are more advantaged anyway, whereas we'd be focusing more on underrepresented student groups. And we also need to be able to show really clear impact. And the numbers of students taking part in placements isn't as high as we might need to show kind of institutional change. But I do support it, and I do recognise the benefits of that as an intervention for students.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or connections or comment on access to success, what you've heard? No. Okay. Right. Well, thank you to Cherie and Alex again. We'll circulate the slides as well. I've just a couple of other things just to kind of mention before we sort of bring this overall meeting to a close, if I may, and we'll have some time if there's any other questions or things that people want to highlight as well. But just a few things briefly, first of all. So the first of those, those of us who've been around long enough to remember back in 2019, when the world was a slightly different place, you may recall we ran a summer conference, a DSE summer conference, which we had from memory in the Students' Union on the top floor there. It was quite a hot day when we did it. Obviously, for obvious reasons, we haven't been able to do that since. There's a few things got in the way, but it is coming back this summer. We were doing it on the 14th of June in the business school, and everyone in DSE is invited. There will unfortunately be a limit ultimately on the number of places, but I would reckon pretty much everybody that wants to come will be able to come. So it's on Wednesday, the 14th of June. There's a brilliant programme that's been put together, and I must credit Tracy Campbell-Monks in particular and her colleagues in the Directorate Office just for giving that some thought and working that up. The overall title of the conference is Living in a Post-Pandemic World, What It's Like Being a Student in 2023. And you'll see the programme in due course when bookings open in a week or two's time. But there's some brilliant sessions co-created with student voices involved in them, delivering alongside some of our DSE and other university colleagues as well. So for now, Wednesday the 14th of June, it's for most of the day. Hold the date. If you particularly want to go to that, you may need to speak obviously to your line manager or the members of your team just to make sure that you can go. But we're trying to get as many people there as possible. So quick, and you'll see more details of that in due course. Now, clearly, for being a student in 2023, one of the particular challenges or concerns you may have, our students may have at the moment alongside other universities, is the marking and assessment boycott that's just begun. We're a little different to any other university in that respect. I'll talk more about this in my message, weekly message tomorrow, just to give you a bit more the kind of the context and the background. This is industrial action being taken by our colleagues who are members of the University and Colleges Union. And that boycott started last week, started this week. There are a huge number of mitigations that we are trying to take around this, but ultimately there are some programs, some courses that are quite specific, quite specialist, whereby if a particular colleague chooses not to do their marking or to support assessments in whatever way, and that could include, for instance, setting exam questions, for instance, not just about marking per se, that could have quite a significant impact. What we're saying to students, and again, I'll touch on this in my message tomorrow, is to be really, really clear about focusing on continuing to submit those assessments that they were supposed to be doing, assignments, I should say, anyway, submitting those to the existing deadlines. And at the moment, we're planning for all assessments to go ahead to the schedule that we would originally have envisaged. So exams starting, for instance, in a couple of weeks' time. Our priority will then be the students who are supposed to be graduating this year, and obviously then we've got to turn our attention to students who are supposed to progress to a later year of study, but the priority will be those graduating. Graduations are still going ahead in July, so that's an added stressor for students. And of course our final year students, those who are particularly anxious about graduating, need to graduate, if they need those results to confirm a job place or a further study place somewhere, that of course is also the cohort who were particularly impacted by the start of the pandemic. They were there right in 2020, so it's unfortunate that this is kind of bookending their time as a student, but nonetheless. Perhaps more positively, the National Student Survey closes this week. It closes on Sunday. The team in Student Academic Services have been really, really pushing this hard this year. I think in the past we used to take a bit of an approach as a university of, the fewer people that filled it out, perhaps the better. And maybe that was no bad thing. And you would have seen last year in particular, and I have to say I wasn't necessarily a fan of this approach. We sort of hid a little bit behind the fact that the return rate wasn't as high as it could have been, and well, only 50% of students filled it out, a bit over. This year, however, I'm really pleased to say we've got just shy of 75% of our final year students have so far completed the survey. the sort of survey experts amongst us will say that actually that's probably a really good thing. You get past the people who are just discontented, and actually people who want to say something really positive will likely have filled it out. So roughly speaking, about 6 of our 8,000 final year students have so far filled it out. I think we need another 100 to get to 75%, which would be fantastic. We'll get the results of that in the summer. This is a slightly different look and feel of the survey this year, some different question sets, but nonetheless, we will see what that tells us. And then the final thing before I just open up for any other questions is just a little teaser for you. The University Distinguished Achievement Awards award panel sat very recently, and although the results are under embargo, I will be able to let you know them and how DSE got on in my weekly update next Friday. It's just a little, the fact I'm teasing you about it suggests, of course, we've done not too badly at all. So just watch this space, see where we get to when I tell you the news next Friday. But I've got a big smile on my face for sure. Right. Let me just throw it open for the last few minutes to any other questions, anything else anybody wants to raise from their particular areas. Just any other comments or whatever. Put your hand up or put something in the chat. Or say nothing at all. I don't mind. No. Going once, going twice. Somebody's just gone, actually. It's gone down to 93. Our people are leaving already. Right. We'll call it a day. Thank you very much, everyone. Seriously, thank you. It's it is really good to see everyone. Next month, we are hoping to focus this meeting on plans for the university's bicentenary, to be confirmed, but that's what we're hoping to have the topic to be. Thank you again to Cherie and Alex for today. Thank you for everyone else for joining us. Good to see you all, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thanks, Simon. Bye.